In the mix of tossing in where you're calling in from, I have a challenge to all of you. I'm going to ask you all to give your best guess definition of an avalanche in 2 to 5 words. So pop that in the chat too if you're feeling brave.
We believe in you. And I'll get it started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Avalanche Awareness webinar. My name is Mary Brown, and I'm the guide manager at Alpine Ascents. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge why we're all here. Traveling in the backcountry is one of the most rewarding ways to move through the mountains, but it also comes with inherent risks. Being prepared, understanding avalanche terrain, and making informed decisions are absolutely essential. And we're really glad you're taking the time to build that foundation tonight. Tonight's session is led by our host, Sydney Kale, and you're in excellent hands. Sydney grew up in Maine, where her love for the natural world began on lakes and rivers by canoe. While studying at St. Lawrence University, she discovered the mountains, first hiking the Adirondack 46ers, then going on to climb all 115 of the highest peaks in the Northeast. Her first mountain job was with the Appalachian Mountain Club as part of the backcountry crew, and she's been working in the outdoor industry ever since. As an outdoor educator, ski patroller, ski tech, and environmental conservation worker. Her fascination with glaciers eventually brought her to Washington, where she now guides on glaciated peaks and still teaches mountaineering, ski, and backpacking courses for knolls in Alaska, Wyoming, and Idaho. When she's not in the field, you'll find her tuning skis, teaching avalanche classes, swimming in alpine lakes, paddling rivers, or scouting her next ski objective. We are thrilled to have her here tonight. A quick note before we begin, everyone attending this webinar will receive $25 off an ARI Level 1 course. I'll send that code in a post-webinar email. And a PSA, if you sign up for both an ARI 1 and an Intro to Backcountry Ski Touring course with Alpine Ascents, you'll receive a $200 combined discount if you sign up for both of those in the same season. One other housekeeping note, if you have questions throughout the presentation, pop them in the Q&A and we'll circle back at the end. With that, I'll hand it over to Sydney. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for hosting us this evening and to Alpine Ascents. And then I want to thank all of you who are on this webinar this evening. Thank you for taking this step in your education, whether it's your first time learning about avalanches or this is your season refresher. The Northwest Avalanche Center is really excited to have you here. And I am as well. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right, here you all are. Okay, so I'm just going to flip, before I get into this, I'm going to flip to a slide right here where there's a QR code. If you have a smartphone accessible, if you could just scan this QR code and check in. The reason that we're doing this is so that we can track all the folks that we're reaching via these classes throughout a given season. It helps with funding for future years. And then it also signs you up to get a post-course email from the Northwest Avalanche Center that will send you other education opportunities for the future. So I'll just give you another second to scan that, and then we'll jump into the content. All right, I'm going to get started now. So tonight we're going to spend about 90 minutes talking about these 4 main topics. We're going to start with avalanche basics. So we're going to talk about what an avalanche is. Thank you all for popping that definition into the chat. I saw some really awesome things in there. So what is an avalanche? Why does an avalanche happen? Where does an avalanche happen? And then we're going to move on to this second bubble here, and we're going to talk about how you can read the avalanche forecast. So we're going to actually check an avalanche forecast together so that you can have that as a resource moving forward and know a little bit about how to read it and interpret it for the future. Next, we're going to talk about how you can avoid avalanche terrain. So we're going to look at some mapping tools and then talk about a basic process for planning. And then we're going to talk about finally some next steps after this presentation. So what gear you might need if you want to engage with avalanche terrain and other skills and classes and resources that exist out there in the world. All right. Oh, there's our check-in. Okay. So avalanche basics. What even is an avalanche? Well, in its simplest form, the definition of an avalanche is that an avalanche is snow sliding down a slope or falling down a slope. So I saw lots of similar answers to that in the chat. So nice job, everyone. Um, all right, so here you can see an image of snow that has broken off from this other snow on the ground and slid downhill. Avalanches can come in many forms. This one in particular is snow that has slid off a roof. Yes, that is still an avalanche. Some may refer to this as a roofalanche, but a very real scenario and place that an avalanche can occur. We've got this one. This is a road cut, which for those of you who are in Washington, we definitely have avalanche terrain that goes over roads. I'll dive into this a little bit more later, but we do have mitigation and forecasters for this as well. So it's not something that you need to worry about, but they can be above roads. And then we've got this more kind of classic looking big open slope where snow can slide downhill. All right. Now, if only it were that simple, but it is not as simple as that, and that is because snow is not uniformly distributed on the ground. So we can kind of think of this analogy as the snowpack being like a layer cake. And when I refer to the snowpack, I'm talking about all the snow that is on the ground at any given time in any given location. So the snowpack is all the layers of the snow. And so in this layer cake example, you can see there's pink, orange, yellow, more pink cake. And so that represents variation in different layers in the snow, differences between these layers, as well as those little frosting layers in between. So if we're thinking about this in a real scenario in terms of the snow that is on the ground, this is an example of how these layers form and occur. So we have the ground, and then we have this storm one label, which is cold, and then we have weather in between them. Now, a lot of you have probably experienced a snowstorm before, but if you have, likely they weren't all the same. Sometimes snow falls and it's falling really slowly, and the snowflakes are really big and they land on you, and immediately it turns to a water droplet. And the snow is flying sideways and it's hitting your face like ice pellets. So that snow is falling and it's different in those two scenarios. And then that snow is landing on the ground and starting to create these layers in our snowpack and differences in the snowpack. And so we also have here a week of sun, a warm and heavy storm, another day, one day, only one day between storms, and then another cold storm, a long, cold, dry spell. So all these differences in the weather and snow that is falling on the ground creates a layered snowpack over time throughout a season. All right, so now if we were to look at this in real snow, this is a side cut of snow. And if you or I were standing in this location right here, we might be able to see differences in the layers in this snow. Or if we touch the snow, we might be able to feel it. And why do we care about these differences anyways? Seeing them, feeling them, knowing about them. It's because they vary in their strength. We've got some layers that are weak and some layers that are strong. And so here in this image, if you have good eyes, you might be able to see where this arrow is pointing. It says common failure layer. So that is some sort of weak snow in there, some difference in those two layers that has caused a weakness, and then a failure or an avalanche or snow sliding. So all these differences, there's different layers, different strengths. Essentially, why we care about this is because all of this can lead to unstable snow. Now, you might be saying right now, Okay, Sydney, we just really dove in. That was a lot of information. I feel very overwhelmed. How am I ever going to know if there's unstable snow, or how am I going to know about these different layers in the snowpack? Well, the good news is that for right now, you don't need to be able to identify these differences, and you don't need to be able to know about weak or strong layers. All you need to know right now is that you're not going to be able to know all those things. And we actually have forecasters that go out there every day and look in the snow and find out all of this information for us. So later we'll learn how to read an avalanche forecast. But for right now, all of that information was just so that you know that you're not going to know everything that's going on in the snowpack because it's so dynamic. All right. So moving on, there's really two main types of avalanches. Most avalanches can be categorized broadly into these two main categories. There are subcategories, but we're just going to talk about the two overarching ones here tonight. So we have a slab avalanche first. A slab avalanche is when there's strong layers of snow that exist over weaker layers of snow. And you can see in this photo right here, there's sort of this angular situation happening in front of this person. And so this is where part of the snowpack has broken off from the existing snowpack and slid downhill. So you can kind of think of this going back to the cake analogy. If you think about that cake, maybe you were frosting it and adding layers when it was slightly warm. And you have a layer of cake, a layer of frosting, you added another layer of cake, and then say you tipped the cake up on its side. This would represent a slope. And then that top layer of cake starts sliding on the frosting downhill. That layer of cake that is sliding in this example represents the slab. So a cohesive unit of snow that starts to slide all together and breaks off from the rest of the snowpack. All right, so here's another image of a slab avalanche. Another way to describe this is as if someone took a cookie cutter and just stuck it into the snow slope and then dragged it down. You can see here on the left, this person is in all the snow that slid down the slope. We refer to this as the debris. So luckily they are still on top of it. All right, this image, you can start to see how these avalanches can be really big. This is at least a couple feet tall by however many feet wide. That is suddenly a lot of snow sliding down the slope. And I know that I don't want to be there when that happens. All right. So that is our slab avalanche. These avalanches do tend to be slightly bigger than the other one we'll talk about, and they're slightly more unpredictable because that weaker snow is below the surface, so we're not actively interacting with it and engaging with it if we are standing on the snow. And so they can be a little bit surprising and therefore pretty scary avalanches. All right, the other type of avalanche that we're going to talk about tonight is a loose snow avalanche. So this one is, in a way, the opposite as a than a slab avalanche. So this type of avalanche, there's actually loose snow, and that looser snow is on top of stronger snow. And so what's happening when one of these avalanches occurs is that there's some weak snow grains that start at a specific point and then they fail and fall, slide downhill, and they hit other weak snow grains, and then those ones fall, and then they hit other snow grains, and then those ones start to fall. And so it creates this sort of cascade effect down the slope. As you can see here, it starts at a very specific point and then broadens out and gets wider as it starts to go down the slope. And so these are sometimes referred to as point release avalanches as well. You can see here, there's a lot of little ones happening here from all sorts of various points. So these ones are a little bit more predictable because often you can see other ones that are happening, that are occurring when you're out. And they sometimes can be smaller, often can be smaller than a slab avalanche, but that doesn't mean that they're not scary because they still can definitely take you off your feet and bury you in some instances. Here's another picture of a point release avalanche. I'm going to give you another challenge to throw in the chat. What do you think was the cause of this avalanche? What started this avalanche in this photo? I'll give you 1 second to share. Let's see. Yeah, so these are all great answers. I love it. Um, Snow falling off of the tree. It could be a bird or wind, anything like that. But yeah, any of those are possible. And I don't know the answer, but yeah, I think it might just be as simple as was some recent heavy snowfall, and maybe some of that snow fell off the tree and triggered this loose avalanche. Nice job. All right, so to recap, we have our two main types of avalanches, two main categories. We have our slab avalanche, which is our stronger snow over our weaker snow, and then our loose snow avalanche, which is our weaker snow over our stronger snow. All right. So moving on, how do avalanches happen? We kind of just touched on this in that last photo of the tree and the point release avalanche. But in order for avalanches to occur, there has to be some sort of trigger. The trigger can be natural, so it could be wind or a bird or snow falling off of a branch. It could be additional snowfall, could be a rock fall. Or it can be human. Humans actually make really good triggers, and most avalanches that humans are caught in were either triggered by themselves or someone in their party. So humans are really good triggers for avalanches. Here is a picture of someone. They are triggering an avalanche. And again, real quick in the chat, what kind of avalanche do we think this is? Which category does it fall under that this human is triggering? Oh, I lost my chat button. Oh, here it is. Nice. Yeah, this is a slab avalanche. So you can see that this is that piece of that cake or that cohesive unit of snow that is starting to slide downhill. And we can start to see the formation of where maybe that crown might be, which the crown is the top of that slab avalanche, what is left over afterwards, that kind of right angle situation in the snow. All right. All right, so where do avalanches happen? Avalanches can start on any slope that is steeper than 30 degrees. Any slope angle that is steeper than 30 degrees has the potential to avalanche. So we're going to dive more into some terrain now. So every avalanche has these three components. Every avalanche has a start zone, which we just learned has to be 30 degrees or greater most of the time. And then it has a track, so where the avalanche is sliding. And then it has a run out or an area where it's coming to a stop. Um, Now, here's a really important terminology thing that I'm going to give you all. So the start zone, the track, and the run out, all three of these components are considered avalanche terrain. Now we know that in order for the avalanche to begin, it needs to be steeper than 30 degrees. And then while it's running, it likely is going to be pretty steep here as well. Uh, but when the avalanche starts to slow down or stop or run out, there's got to be some reason that all of that debris is starting to slow down. And most likely that's because the slope angle is becoming less. The slope is becoming less steep. Um, so what that means is that you could be in a run out in terrain that is less steep than 30 degrees, but you are still in avalanche terrain because you are below a start zone and a track. And so you're in an area where an avalanche could run out. So it's really important that when you hear avalanche terrain or are referring to avalanche terrain, that you are referring to all three of these components and not just the really steep slopes. So let's look at this a little bit more. So all avalanche paths, they vary in shapes and sizes. There can be lots of differences. So this one's pretty wide. Doesn't necessarily look too scary or threatening. I feel like oftentimes when we think of avalanche path, we think of those ski movies where they're skiing crazy big lines and the snow is sliding, but that is not always the case. So on these next couple slides, after I talk about the image, there's going to be some orange outlines that go up, and that's essentially just outlining where the avalanche terrain is in the image. So we all probably looked at this image and saw this big avalanche path that had occurred in this image, but then we didn't even think to look back here at this left-hand corner at this other potential avalanche path. All right, so I'm not going to throw out the orange outlines just yet. So while I talk about this area, just kind of think to yourself, where do you think the avalanche paths are? Where do you think the avalanche terrain is? And we've got a couple of obvious areas, more obvious areas here where we have, like on the right side of this image, we have this treeless, steep looking gully type area. And that does look like an avalanche path to me. And there's a couple clues in here. The first being we have some vegetation clues. There's not really very many trees in there. And so that maybe because there's been avalanches that have happened there before. And if an avalanche has occurred there before, an avalanche can occur there again. We often do see the same paths sliding year after year. So that's an indicator that it could slide again and that it is avalanche terrain. Another thing that I'm looking at is simply just the erosion that it looks like has occurred in this gully from prior avalanches. And then we've got further to the left of the image, we have some more steep slopes that look like they could slide. Again, some areas with very minimal vegetation. And then we also have some areas in here that do have trees, but still look like they're pretty steep. And if I throw up these outlines, yeah, there's a lot of avalanche terrain in here. And I might even go on to say, like, some of these outlines could even be expanded potentially. Again, looking at a 2D image is sometimes a little bit hard to suss these things out, but yeah, there's a lot of avalanche terrain in this photo. And even areas where there's sparse trees, that can still be avalanche terrain. If you can easily ski through trees, then an avalanche could also move through those trees. So trees, I feel like, are often thought of as a safe zone, and that is not necessarily true at all. All right, here is another image. Again, start to think to yourself, where do you think the avalanche terrain is in this photo? Start to think about those nitty-gritty details, where it might not be so obvious where the avalanche terrain is. Is there any micro terrain or smaller terrain features? And we actually can see an avalanche crown in the background here if you've got really good eyes on the left side of this mountain. You can see it's like a pretty horizontal line that comes down. It's kind of in that shadow there on the more left-hand side. All right, here's our avalanche terrain. So we do have some micro features in here that are really small, but even a really small slope of 30 degrees or more of avalanche terrain can still be hazardous. So we want to make sure we're looking out for all of that micro terrain as well. All right, so there's one more piece of terrain that I want to talk about with you all before we move on. And this is a terrain trap. And so a terrain trap is anything that can amplify the consequence of being caught in an avalanche. So in this initial image here, we've got cliffs and rocks. So cliffs and rocks are a terrain trap because you could be pushed over, off of, or into them. And in this photo, if you look really closely above these rocks and at the trees, you can see a crown from where an avalanche occurred. And so, if you or I were standing up there when that avalanche occurred, we would have been swept over these rocks off of this cliff and potentially injured even more. And that would definitely amplify the consequence of being caught in this avalanche. And so, that is something we want to look out for and be aware of when choosing what terrain we're going to travel in. Oh, there's a zoom in of that path. All right, another piece of a terrain feature that is considered a terrain trap is a gully. So if we think back to those slab avalanche images that were really deep, really wide, there was a lot of snow. If those avalanches occurred and they had a pretty planar run out where all of that debris was spread out, still could be very consequential. It could kill you. Um, but now think about all of that mass of snow, the same mass of snow, and the bottom of the avalanche path, the runout, is now a gully. And so all of that mass of snow is going to accumulate in a much smaller space. And so what that means for you, if you're caught or buried in that avalanche, is now there's way more snow that you're buried in, way more snow on top of you. So A, that's a bunch of extra weight on top of you. And B, that's a lot more snow that your buddies who are hopefully trained in avalanche rescue that they have to dig through to get to you. And if you're caught in an avalanche, you only have about 10 to 15 minutes to live before you suffocate, and that's not very long. And so if you're all of a sudden buried in a gully where there's a lot more snow on top of you, that is definitely amplifying the consequence of being caught in that avalanche. Another one is this is similar to the similar idea to a gully, but terrain that flattens abruptly, because this still means that snow can pile up a lot more rapidly here, because this could be where the run out of the avalanche is. And for those of you that are in Washington, I feel like this is a big one because we have a lot of forest roads that are not plowed in the winter and offer really great access to other skiing. And they're pretty mellow themselves, or snowshoeing or even walking your dog. Somewhere. And so we don't often think of these as avalanche terrain, but we do want to be aware of what is the terrain above us. Is there a slope over 30 degrees above us? And could we potentially be in a run out? Could we potentially be in avalanche terrain right now? All right. And another feature that is a terrain trap is also a tree. So a tree is something that we could be pushed into and could cause trauma or injury. And an avalanche can travel through trees. If we can ski or snowboard through the trees, an avalanche can travel through it as well. And trauma is a way that people die in avalanches as well. It's not only asphyxiation. People do die from trauma as well. And that can be trees. So that is also a terrain trap. And then we also actually, let's see, I'm going to poll the crowd again and see if there's another big one, particularly for folks in Washington, um, you Alpine Ascents folks that might be here. What is another terrain trap that we might find in glaciated terrain? Let's see if anyone can throw it in the chat. Yeah, crevasses. Those are a really big one. If you are caught in an avalanche and swept into a crevasse, that is definitely amplifying the consequence of being caught in that avalanche. Nice job, folks who threw that in there. Thank you. All right. So we're going to do a little activity and I'm just going to kind of walk through it. I'll ask for a little bit of participation in the chat here, but bear with me as I do this virtually with you all. So let me go to, can I just, yeah, here we go. And okay, great. So, where can avalanches happen? So, in this activity, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a tool that you can use to identify avalanche terrain. And then we're going to look at a couple more pictures and try and determine if it's avalanche terrain using that tool. Um, Actually, does someone just want to maybe Mary just throw in the chat, just to make sure that everyone can see this new PowerPoint that I just switched to before I ramble on? Someone give me like a thumbs up or
Yes, I
okay,
can
great.
see it.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So an avalanche has three main ingredients, which we did talk about. And so those ingredients are avalanche terrain. Oh, oh, there we go. Unstable snow. And finally, a trigger. So all three of these components have to be present in order for an avalanche to occur. Now, there's really only one of these that we can control because we know that we are a really good trigger, so we cannot eliminate that from this equation, unfortunately. The unstable snow part, that's what we talked about at the beginning, and we don't have control over that, unfortunately. And the way that we can learn about that is through our forecasters and the forecasts that they write, which again, we're still going to come back to in a little bit. So the only one that we have control over is avalanche terrain. And so that's what we're going to focus on right now. So we talked about how avalanches can start on a slope that is greater than 30 degrees, and most commonly that is between 35 and 45 degrees. And the reason we don't include terrain over 45 degrees is because oftentimes that terrain is too steep to really accumulate large masses of snow. And so when snow falls, it just often tends to naturally shed. It can build up in certain scenarios, like in certain gullies or couloirs or anything like that, or especially if you're like an ice climber or something, and you're like going in these steep gullies to access climbing terrain. And of course, then there's going to be other hazards in that terrain like rock fall or you and a long sliding fall for those climbers or other aspiring climbers in the group. And so the tool we're going to talk about is an inclinometer. And so that is a tool you can use to measure slope angle. And so I'll show you my inclinometer here really quick. Just stop sharing my screen. So this is an inclinometer, like plastic one from BCA, Backcountry Access. It's around $20. I do like this one because, especially if I'm out for a long period of time, this one does not have a battery. It does not die in the cold like my cell phone might. And this one, essentially how it works is I will align this piece of plastic or this one up with a horizon line in a piece of terrain, so like the side of a mountain, and I will then adjust it so it's lined up, and then you can see there's a little marble in here that is moving, and so that is lining up with a corresponding number and in the graph color. And so you can see the slope angle and if it is where an avalanche could start. So that is my inclinometer. And I referenced my phone. And yes, most phones come preloaded with an inclinometer as well. On the iPhone, it is the Measure app, which often you go, oh, that's my camera. But then in the corner here, there's like a level option. And so you can click that level and then you can go and do your slope angle. And so this is, I would be lining up the terrain or the horizon line with one of the lines on my phone. Or I could put it and measure the slope that I am directly on in any given moment. And I can put my pole or something on the snow surface and measure the slope angle of the location that I'm currently at as well. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my screen sharing. All right. So as we go through this activity, I'm going to throw up some photos. And so if you feel free to grab your phone or if you have an inclinometer, just use that, hold it up to the screen. If you are feeling like actively participating and engaging with this. All right. So do you all think an avalanche could happen here? And also just throw in the chat, you can just throw in some yeses or nos as we go through these photos as well. Let me pull it up. All right, so yeah, if I line my inclinometer up, the base of my inclinometer up with the horizon line in here, I'm just gonna pop up a one on the screen. Yeah, so will just pop up on each of the photos here. Yeah, that looks to be just under 15 degrees. So I am not worried about an avalanche occurring here because it also looks like I'm above most other terrain around me. All right, what about this image? Do we think that an avalanche could happen here? Are we in avalanche terrain? All right, we're already getting some different answers. I love it. Okay. So if you're thinking, yes, potentially this could be avalanche terrain, you might be thinking that because you're like, okay, well, we're clearly at the bottom of a slope. I don't know what's above me. And so therefore, maybe I am in avalanche terrain. If that's where your brain went, I love that you're already thinking about that. That is awesome. You're already being really heads up about thinking about terrain you might be exposed to. I am going to just throw up a couple inclinometers here. And based on these, it's not where we are standing right now in this given moment. We'll say that we know the terrain does not get steeper around us. It only gets less steep. These are just the most minor hills around us. Then no, in this instance, we are not in avalanche terrain based on measuring these little slopes that we're standing around. But if you are already thinking about the terrain around you, I love where your head's at. Keep it up. Okay. Oh, I just threw some up. But what do you all think about this photo? There's avalanche terrain here. And so we are kind of thinking more about where is it in this photo? Yeah, there's a lot. Okay, so we know that horizon line is avalanche terrain that is measuring over 30 degrees. This one is 2 down here. Great. Now, are there any other terrain features in this photo that we should be worried about? Throw that in the chat if you feel like you have a guess. Yeah, in the middle, there's some stuff that seems pretty scary, some terrain that I don't want to be caught in. Yeah, the back left. Yeah, there's that circle there. But yeah, essentially, there's also a lot of terrain traps in this photo. This circle is a pretty big gully. So if I was up here and I was caught in an avalanche, chances are I would be swept into that gully. There's some cliffs over here. So there are terrain traps in this photo as well. Okay, what about this photo? Do we think an avalanche could happen here? Yeah, so this one is also a little bit tricky. So if I measure this horizon line up here at the top, um, let's see what I get. So I throw up my inclinometer there, and that horizon line is about 15 degrees. So that particular part of this slope, I'm not worried about an avalanche occurring in. However, this is where one of the limits to our inclinometer comes in. It is more difficult to measure the slope angle sight on of a slope. You can do it with an inclinometer. It just is a little bit harder, and so you have to count for more potential for human error in that measurement. Where an inclinometer does best is measuring something like the horizon line. Now, I also could measure this slope that I'm on, that I'm currently standing on, say I'm the one who took this photo. I could measure this slope where I am right now, and determine that that is in fact less than 30 degrees. Um, and I know now, because from down here where I am, I took the slope angle of the horizon line. So if I could get to that horizon line, I would know that I was not in avalanche terrain. So the question is, do I think I can get there? Or what is the best way to get to that horizon line? Knowing that what I'm on right now is not avalanche terrain and up there is not avalanche terrain, but maybe I'm unsure about this slope kind of below and to the right of where my inclinometer is right now. I'm not sure about that slope, but I really want to go ski and snowboard that with my friends. Um, so what can I do? So what I might look for in my route to this ridge is I'm probably going to go right up the middle here, and I'm going to avoid this terrain here on the left because that does look pretty steep, and it also looks like there might be a terrain trap in there. So that could be avalanche terrain. So I'm going to avoid that. So I'm going to kind of thread the needle and go right up alongside that in the mellow terrain to the ridge line. Now, once I'm on the ridge line, I know that I'm not in avalanche terrain because I took a slope angle from below where the angle was really good and where the inclinometer works best. Now, from right here, perhaps, or maybe even a little bit lower, maybe then I had a really good vantage of this other slope and I could see the horizon line of that slope from this other angle. So now when I'm up there, I can now take that slope angle. And if I do feel like I have a pretty good holistic vision of that slope, I could take a slope angle of it um, to determine if it were avalanche terrain or not. But we do have to remember when we're taking slope angles, there is some human error in that. So do err on the side of caution. And I tend to say, okay, maybe like what if the slope angle were a couple degrees more than what I measured it at? Because if we're worried about a couple degrees, then we probably shouldn't be engaging with that terrain. So, anyways, that's just a little tidbit about how I might choose a route through this terrain and use the inclinometer tool in this way to help me out to figure out what slope angles of this various terrain might be. All right, last one. Can an avalanche happen here? Oh, I just threw up the inclinometer again. All right, so we've got a snowmobile in the middle here too for scale. So we've got our inclinometer. So that spot is less than 30 degrees. But we do have these other little spots that are in the shadow here, and are could produce an avalanche. I would say that those are most likely avalanche terrain, especially this one. I would say that's definitely avalanche terrain. Even if it's really small, this micro terrain feature, these rollovers, they could definitely produce an avalanche. And I do think there probably is enough snow that that could bury you, but like say looking at another really small slope, even one that couldn't bury you can still have consequences if it knocks you off your feet. But looking at the scale of this really small snowmobiler, I think these are actually pretty big. And so, yes, this terrain could produce an avalanche, even though the horizon line looks pretty mellow. All right, let me see if I can figure out how to exit out of this and go back to my other presentation. Okay. All right, moving on. So in review, an avalanche has three main ingredients. We've got avalanche terrain, we've got, oops, unstable snow, and we've got a trigger. And so we just learned about avalanche terrain and a tool to help you identify some avalanche terrain in the field. Which again, this isn't an end-all be-all tool, but it is a tool that helps you train your eye for looking at avalanche terrain. And avalanche terrain is the one we can control. All right. So now we're going to dive into how to read an avalanche forecast, your next tool that we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to watch this short video. And I'm going to play it. If someone could just confirm with me that they can hear sound as I start it, that would be amazing.
Snow avalanche danger changes
Yes.
season to season, month to month, and day to day. In other words, each day is different. Avalanche forecasters track snowpack and weather conditions and provide daily avalanche forecasts for many mountainous areas in the United States. Avalanche activity is controlled by the interaction of three complex factors: the terrain, the weather, and the snowpack. Whether you are new to the backcountry or a seasoned professional, the avalanche forecast aims to make this complex subject as easy to understand as possible. The information in the forecast begins with simple summary messaging and progresses to more detailed, specific information. The first and most basic component of the forecast is the bottom line. This is take-home messaging for everyone, regardless of avalanche knowledge. The bottom line gives you simple information about three basic avalanche questions. What is it? Where is it? And what should you do about it? Think of it as a soundbite or a summary of the most important information for the day. Next is the avalanche danger rating. The scale consists of 5 ascending levels. Your chance of encountering an avalanche increases dramatically with each level. Many avalanche forecasts provide danger ratings for 3 elevation bands. For example, in this view, the danger is rated at considerable at all elevation bands. And in this view, the danger is considerable in the upper band and moderate in the middle and lower band. For a more detailed tutorial on the avalanche danger scale, go here. Avalanche problems are an extension of the danger rating. Avalanches come in many shapes and sizes. Avalanche problems allow you to better visualize and understand the avalanches you may encounter. This section illustrates the type of avalanche, where that avalanche exists in the terrain, how likely you are to trigger it, and how big it will be. This set of graphics is often accompanied by written descriptions and media that help illustrate or explain it. For a more detailed tutorial on avalanche problems, go here. The forecast discussion is an important catch-all where forecasters may provide more specific information on the snowpack, avalanche cycles, complex conditions, or other interesting topics that dive deeper into the what is it, where is it, and what should you do about it questions. Lastly, a mountain weather section is included because it plays such a critical role in both avalanche formation and trip planning. This section provides a basic overview of both the recent weather and the weather you may encounter. Each day is different. The avalanche forecast is an important starting point in your winter planning process. You are in charge. You make the choice. Visit avalanche.org to find the avalanche forecast for your area.
All right, so we are going to look at a forecast together. There is not a current forecast on the Northwest Avalanche Center website, but I do have an archived one pulled up that we can go through together. And this is a QR code if you are interested in just navigating to the website, but I am going to continue sharing my screen and just pull it up on my computer. And so you're welcome to follow along on there as well. So when you navigate, oh gosh, the website. I have so many things going on my screen right now. Here we go. Okay. Well, so first of all, here, let's start here at avalanche.org. So this is where you can go, no matter where you are located, to find the Avalanche Center for your area. So we've got all these different avalanche centers all over the country, including this tiny one over here in New Hampshire. And so there's so many avalanche centers. And there's also a bunch in Canada too that you can access through their avalanche website. And so over here is the Northwest Avalanche Center, and so you can click on these and it'll redirect you as well. But this is the Northwest Avalanche Center homepage. So this is what it looks like when you navigate to the homepage. And so here again is the zoomed in map of our area for folks that are here in Washington. We've got all of these different zones going down to Mount Hood, including the Olympics. And these are shaded blue right now because they have started, NWAC this week just started some like sporadic weather reporting and forecasting, but they are starting next week with full-time daily forecasts if there's enough snow, if that is appropriate. But they haven't started right now. But at any avalanche center, it is really great that most avalanche centers use a really similar format. So if you do travel and go to other places, it's going to look really similar and therefore be pretty user friendly. And this is happening more and more through the current years as the avalanche centers are starting to work together more. It's really great to see that platform really coming together. There's also an app called the Avi app, and every year more avalanche centers get on that app, and it's really easy to just have on your phone and toggle through the different avalanche centers. So anyways, these are the various zones. And when an avalanche center is forecasting, these zones will actually be shaded a specific color in coordination with this avalanche danger scale that's down here at the bottom, that 1 through 5 scale. And so each zone will have a different color on it. So once you click a zone, excuse me, you will be directed to the forecast for that day, for that zone. And it is important to note that the Northwest Avalanche Center issues their forecasts the night before. So they will issue their forecast at 6 p.m. for the following day. And as far as I'm aware, they are still the only avalanche center that does it that way. Most avalanche centers do issue their forecasts in the morning for that current day. So that's just something to keep in mind. So each avalanche forecast, kind of like the video just showed, they will give us the bottom line, that take-home messaging, the what is it, where is it, and what should you do about it. And essentially, the idea is the forecasters, if they're just trying to get out some basic knowledge, keeping in mind that this might be the only thing that somebody reads for a given day if they're going to go out. Now, hopefully you do decide to dive in a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more if you're going to go out. But this gives the major big picture and any serious points they want to get across to the public. And then as we scroll down, we've got this triangle here, and you can think of this like a crosscut of a mountain and these as like different topography lines, contour lines. And so this will also be different at different avalanche centers because in different places there's different elevations. Like New Hampshire's upper elevation is definitely going to be different than Washington's upper elevations. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. And they will have a danger scale rating for each elevation. Sometimes they'll all be the same, sometimes they'll all be different, like in this forecast here. And then as you move to the right, it'll be the outlook for the next day, which can be really helpful in thinking about how are things trending? How is a snowpack trending? Is it erring on the side of getting more stable, less stable? That can just be really helpful before you go out for the day and take a look at things. Okay. So then here, down here, you might be saying at this danger scale, you might be saying, okay, what does considerable avalanche danger even mean? We've got more jargon here in the avalanche world that we've got to break down. So then you can pop out this danger scale here and take a look at that. And so what does considerable mean? We've got travel advice, likelihood of avalanches, and avalanche size and distribution. So in considerable, we've got natural avalanches are possible and human triggered avalanches are likely. And here in this considerable zone, this is actually where most of the avalanche accidents happen, because at extreme, people are not really going out. At low, there's just less likelihood of avalanches. And so a lot of avalanche accidents happen in that considerable to moderate danger level. Okay, so that's really the meat of what I want to talk about. I am just going to briefly go through the rest of it in case you want to dive into that more on your own. But I'm just going to read this out and kind of just talk about it a little bit more, so you can see what's going on and what I might take from this. So the bottom line for this forecast, this is Mount Hood, last year, Thursday, January 30th, 2025. And again, this was issued at 6 p.m. So heavy snow and intense wind redistribution will lead to very dangerous avalanche conditions developing at upper elevations. Avoid travel in wind-loaded slide paths. At lower and middle elevations, variable pre-existing services include weak snow on north aspects that may result in widely breaking or surprising avalanches. All right, that's pretty loaded. I did choose a sort of loaded one here. And the idea is that they don't include a lot of those jargony terms, but sometimes they have to. And so if they do, you will see a little underline here. And so this is defining avalanche for us. A massive snow sliding, tumbling, falling down an inclined surface. Aspects, compass direction on a slope. So that can be super helpful if you're not sure what a word in there means. And then you can also additionally click it and it'll take you to another page as well. So here, when I'm thinking about this, reading this bottom line, there's some pretty big things I can take away from this. The what is it? It's heavy snow, and there's some weak snow too, and some wind-loaded paths. That's the what is it? The where is it? Well, the heavy snow and wind loaded. Well, the heavy snow is everywhere. I guess the wind loaded could also be everywhere, but they are talking about it at upper elevations. And then the weak snow is at mid and lower on north aspects. So I just gained a lot of information about where these conditions exist. And then the travel advice, a lot of times they throw in there, they're just saying it specifically, avoid these areas. And so in this one, they say avoid travel in wind-loaded slide paths. A lot of the avalanche forecasts will have a format that is similar to this. And as you read more, different avalanche centers, different forecasters, you'll kind of start to recognize how they format theirs as well. All right, so moving on, just to quickly go through what else exists here, because this is an amazing resource that you can reference in the future, especially if you want to keep learning more about this stuff. So as you continue down, it'll list our avalanche problems. Sometimes there's only one, sometimes there's more than one. And so here we've got that wind slab, which the bottom line did tell us about. And we've got some of these graphs. I'm not going to go too much into that, but if you do want to do some self-learning, you can go to avalanche.org and it'll kind of explain that. And then it also, if you take an avalanche level 1, they dive into this a lot as well, how to read a forecast. There's some discussion, some images. In this scenario, we do have a second problem. And you also will see that keyword that we learned about, slab. So this is a specific type of slab, but you all do now know what a slab is. So that can be a familiar piece of information. And then, yeah, just a discussion about that, more photos, forecast discussion, other helpful information, maybe about what's been going on recently. And then lots of media and images. This can be really helpful to if you don't go out for a day, a specific day, but like there's something really interesting going on, you can look at some photos and say, okay, they talked about this thing, but what even is that? I don't really know. You can look at some images to kind of try and calibrate your brain and what might be going on out there to what you're reading in the forecast. That can be really helpful. And then we've also got a weather summary, which is really important too. The forecasters do use it to help write a forecast, but why you might want to use it, and then you also, let me just go back up here. You can also go to a weather forecast here. But you might want to use this also just as your own personal planning resource. For example, it can be really helpful to know that, okay, on ridge lines, the wind is going to be 50 miles an hour. So, okay, maybe that's not going to be a super pleasant place to be tomorrow, regardless of if I'm in avalanche terrain or not. So that can be a really helpful resource, all of their weather information that they've got on their website. So I do encourage you to also check that out. And the Northwest Avalanche Center also has their own meteorologist too. So that's the really quick overview of the avalanche forecast. If you are really wanting to learn more about this and get into this, I do encourage you to start reading the avalanche forecast. It can be really helpful, again, to start calibrating your brain. And if you are like someone who maybe you're taking a level 1, you're here for a refresher. Something that I like to do is I will just have that Avi app on my phone. And so when I have a down minute in the day, I can just quickly open the avalanche forecast and look at it and see what's going on, especially if I'm planning on going out in the next few days. That can be a really helpful way to start understanding what's going on in the mountains before you make a plan about what you're going to do. Okay. Enough about that. Again, if you have any additional questions, pop them in the chat, but there is a lot to dive into, and that was a really quick overview, but I am going to start to move on here. Okay, we kind of just went over that, so I will skip through that. And then, okay, so you've read the forecast, you've learned a little bit about what's going on out there. Now say you are out recreating. It doesn't have to necessarily be engaging with avalanche terrain, but you can look for these 5 red flags that might be occurring out there. And these red flags are signs that avalanche danger likelihood is probably increasing. So I'm going to walk through these. So the first one is wind. If it's really windy, chances are we've got some wind slabs forming, which is a specific type of slab, but we do know what a slab is now. So again, it's that strong snow over weak snow, that potentially bigger, a little bit more predictable avalanche. And so here we can see in this photo, here, let me go back to full screen. There we go. Okay, that's better. So here you can see on this ridge line, that rocky peak to the right, you can see some blowing snow with the sky in the backdrop. So that's telling me that it's windy up there. Snow is being transported, which can create slabs. Again, here we got some wind transport. When you see funky textures or weird angles in the snow, it is likely due to some wind. And again, here you can see that off of that, you can see that snow being picked up by the wind there as well and transported. Again, we've got some snow in the sky. It doesn't seem like it's actively snowing because there's clearly some sunlight happening, but snow is being transported. It is windy out. So that's our first red flag. Our next red flag is warming temperatures. So rapid increase in temperatures. We've got a roller ball here. That's what that's called. And so that's like sticky snowball snow. If any of you are familiar with that, that's the kind of scenario that these roller balls form in, and that is an indication of rapid warming. There's a lot of roller balls in that photo. They can be really big. We've got this is well, I'm sure you all know this is an icicle, but what this is telling me is that at some point in time, water was or snow turned to the form of water. And so it had to warm up to turn into that form, even if it did refreeze. But that's telling me that there was definitely water moving through the snowpack, which is a pretty big change for the snow. Ultimately, when talking about these, common trend is that the snowpack doesn't like really big, fast changes. It needs time to adapt to those changes. So anytime there's a really big change in temperature or precipitation, that is generally not a good sign for the snowpack. All right, here's more water. We can just kind of see the water in the snowpack there, in those runnels and in that gully. You arrived at the trailhead, and this is what your windshield looks like. Seems like it might be warm out there and wet. Or yeah, you've got snow that is turning to droplets on your snowmobile. Sometimes I'll see this on my skis. Like if you're at the resort even, sometimes you'll notice that you don't have snow on your skis anymore. It's actually just a bunch of water. So that's rapid warming. And then we've got heavy snowfall. So it's more than an inch per hour. You're not necessarily going to know exactly how fast snow is falling, but if you're seeing a significant increases in snowfall, like say you're wearing a brimmed hat and you see it building up on your friend's hat, on your snowmobile, if you're breaking trail and it's really tough, or you're doing multiple laps and you can't even see your tracks from your last one. Then we've got cracking, collapsing, and woomping. And so I'm going to show you some pictures of some cracks first. So this is referred to as a shooting crack, coming out from this ski tip here. And so what this is like the weak snow is propagating, the weak layer. And so you can kind of think of this like going back to that layer cake analogy, this snow on the right hand side of the crack. That's that cohesive unit of snow or piece of cake. And if this terrain is steep enough, this could potentially slide. And then where that crack is, that could be either part of the debris, part of the avalanche slide, or could even be the crown of the avalanche, where that cohesive mass of snow is breaking off and starting to slide. So this is a really big red flag. If you ever see this, you should turn around. Another crack coming out from ski tips. And then just going back really quick to the what we mean by collapsing and woomping in this. That's sort of the feeling and sound that can sometimes happen with this crack. And what's happening is the snowpack is sort of settling, or there's a layer of weak snow that is collapsing a bit. And so you can kind of think of this like if you had a bunch of dominoes stacked upright. And you can think of those dominoes are like snow grains. They're really angular. There's lots of air in between all those angles. And then all of a sudden that air disappears and everything collapses and you kind of feel a little like thud down. That's what we mean by collapsing. And then whumping is the sound that accompanies that. It kind of is just like a whoomp. But that's what is occurring there. That's what we mean by cracking, collapsing, and whumping. You can kind of feel it a little bit. Sometimes you'll see trees around you shake if there are any. All right. And finally, if you see other recent avalanches, if you're visually looking at some other avalanches, that is a pretty good indication that more avalanches could occur and that there is some instability, some weakness in the snowpack. And so you should be really heads up about what's going on. Yeah, you're out and you see debris like that. More avalanches could happen. All right. And now, how do you avoid avalanche terrain? So we're going to talk about two main things in this category. The first one is we're going to talk about a map feature that you can use. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into maps and how to read them. That should be something that you all should look into and learn about, especially if you're trying to engage with avalanche terrain at some point in the future. There are lots of really good other webinars or classes or books you can read, or just pull out a map and start looking at it, and seeing what you can recognize on it and look at the key and all that sort of stuff. But anyways, what I want to talk about right now is just a specific feature of the map tool. And so this image right here is a screenshot from an app called CalTopo. Some other common mapping apps, especially for those in the snow industry or skiing or snowboarding or something, might be, or mountaineering or whatever you're doing, Gaia or Onyx Backcountry. Those are also really good ones. But this one is CalTopo, which I also really like to use on my desktop. And what is on this map is a layer of slope angle shading. So um, most of these apps, common apps, will have a layer you can add of slope angle shading. It is really important to look at the key of what each color means because it might vary a little bit from app to app. So you do want to make sure you're looking at that. And so for this one in particular, it looks like the terrain that's steeper than 30 degrees, 30 to 45 degrees, so where an avalanche could start, is this light orange to red color. So that's what we're looking at here. And so essentially it's going to shade any terrain that is in that steepness level, that color. So say my skill level, I had just taken an avalanche awareness course, and therefore I wanted to avoid avalanche terrain. And I'm looking at this map. What do I think about a good place to go? In this terrain to test out my new skis and try and look for avalanche terrain. Do I want to go here? Probably not. We got a lot of terrain that is probably still going to be rocky, even in the height of winter. It's quite steep. And then we also just have a lot of terrain that is either where an avalanche could start, so that 30 to 45, or underneath steeper terrain. And so therefore it would also be avalanche terrain. So this is probably not where I'm gonna choose to go for my first foray learning about avalanches. And this is the Boston Basin area. If any of you Washington folks are familiar with that area, that's what that is. Okay. This next image is, if any of you, again, Washington folks are familiar, this is an image of Artist Point and Mount Baker. You can see the chairlift in here in the upper right corner. And so same question, same scenario. You've taken an awareness course and you want to find a spot to go where you can avoid avalanche terrain. There are some spots you could go in this photo. There still is a lot of avalanche terrain in here, but there are some spots where we can avoid it too. So this black line, actually, it is a road, but it's not plowed in the wintertime. And this does, on top of a ridgeline. So if you're above the avalanche terrain, you are not at risk of being hit by that avalanche. And so it does stay up on a ridgeline. It does give you some exposure, like down at the bottom here. Are some places that you do have to be really heads up, but for the most part, you can minimize a lot of your exposure by staying up on this ridgeline. There are also some spots like down by these lakes that you can go and avoid avalanche terrain, just making sure you're staying far enough away from those steeper slopes above you so that you're not potentially in the runout zone. So that's really the overview of these map layers. You also can, if you have one of these map apps on your phone, you can put the layer on your map, and then if you're looking to use it offline, you might just have to download that layer as well. And then one other thing I want to mention as well is that, like the inclinometer, there are limitations to these tools. So knowing when these tools and these resources are applicable and when maybe they're not and they're a little bit more limiting. And so this is a really good overview of terrain and a really good planning resource. But if there's, say, like a 10-foot cliff in mostly mellow under 30-degree terrain, this slope angle shading might not pick that up. It might not show it, even though it's a terrain trap. It's a micro feature that could avalanche. This isn't going to show every nitty-gritty little thing. It's more for the big picture. And these slope angle shadings, they're not perfect. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. Again, it's a really good big picture planning tool. But just know the limits of it, and where you might have to pull in other resources for your planning, like getting out there and visually looking at something, for example. All right. I'm going to move on now to a basic process for avoiding avalanche danger. If you're going to plan a day out, whether you want to engage with avalanche terrain or not, this is a really great way to plan for that. And this is something all sorts of people do at different varying levels, from avalanche forecasters to mountain guides to someone planning their first trip out for the day. It's a really good process to use. So what it looks like is starting with some assessment. So what's going on out there? This includes reading the forecast. This should be the very first thing you do. You want to know what's going on in the mountains before you jump into planning anything. The next step is to plan. So after you've read the forecast, pick your terrain and your location next. This often happens a little backwards. People will be like, I really want to go ski this awesome line I've been thinking about for so long. And then they'll look at the avalanche danger and then they'll kind of make some mental shortcuts to convince themselves that it does fit into the avalanche danger. So rather than falling susceptible to that, which it can happen, you sometimes end up wanting to, look at the avalanche forecast first and see what's going on out there. And then based on that, that's when you can choose the location and the type of terrain you want to go into and the type of terrain you want to avoid. And then finally, we have some reflection. This one's huge and I feel like the most easily missed. But we do want to reflect. That's how we improve as individuals. We are humans after all, and we can make mistakes, and we can keep learning and getting better. So some things that I might ask in a reflection with my group after a given day is, did we stick to our plan? How did our decisions go? Like, what were our major decision points? Was there a spot we felt the most exposed throughout the day? And like, let's break that down and talk about it. Um, and then a big one of my mentors a while ago said this one to me, and it has stuck with me ever since. But did we get after it or did we get away with it? So what we mean by that is, did we make good decisions or do we just get lucky? You don't always get immediate feedback when you're traveling in avalanche terrain. You might have made poor decisions and gotten away with it. So sometimes it can be hard to figure out, did I even make good decisions? But if we keep going out there and making assessments and reflecting and improving, we can hopefully continue to make good decisions. And then the last one that I'll plug, since a lot of this presentation is about some of these hard skills, but communication, that is really, really important. Ultimately, when we're out there, again, we are humans and we are interacting and engaging and making these really big decisions with one another. And our life is in the hands of the people that we are with. So working on our communication and how we can improve with that as well. And this basic process is something that if you take an avalanche level 1, there's a lot of focus on this as well. And so you'll learn a lot more about this in that class also. Okay, and finally, our last section is, what are your next steps after we leave here tonight? So what other skills might you need? Let's jump into first. You want to avoid avalanche trains. You're like, I'm not ready for this yet. I'm not sure I ever will be. Or maybe you're like, in a couple years, I would like to jump into that, but for now, not yet. Some skills that you need is you still have to be able to identify avalanche terrain, because you need to be able to avoid it and know how to avoid it. So you need to be able to identify it. That also comes with map reading. You need to be able to read a map, and I also identify avalanche terrain on a map as well. And also just a really, really good skill to have as well, which goes into some of in our bottom bubble, we have our winter travel skills and safety. So map reading could even be encompassed into that. But just what kind of gear you need to carry, what emergency supplies, maybe repair supplies, like what you might need to know if you need help out there, other resources. So many things can fit into that category, as well as first aid. Maybe you want to consider getting some first aid training. You can take a wilderness first aid course that is a 1-day course, especially if you're going into the backcountry a lot. That might be something you want to consider. And also consider asking folks that you go into the backcountry with if they want to take one of those courses. Maybe you can take it together. And again, there's also lots of books out there that can help with this stuff too, if you're also looking for some independent learning outside of a course as well. Okay, so say you do want to engage with avalanche terrain. You've taken a level 1, you've gotten some training, and you do want to engage. You still need all those initial skills. You need winter travel skills and safety. You need to have some first aid skills, some map reading skills. You have to be able to identify avalanche terrain on maps, in person, in photos. Um, but you also need some other skills as well. You need some group management and communication skills, which arguably you still actually definitely need these, even if you're not engaging with avalanche terrain. That can be applicable in any terrain on just a backpacking trip, even in the summertime. Um, you need to have avalanche rescue skills. And so, again, this is a 1 day course that you can take, but you do need to know how to rescue someone if they are caught in an avalanche, just as you want people that you are with to be able to rescue you if you are caught in an avalanche. That is a non-negotiable if you're going to engage with avalanche terrain. And I'll talk about the gear in just a little bit. You need to be able to understand an avalanche forecast. So start reading some avalanche forecasts, learn what that's like, and you can gain a lot of information just from reading those, and seeing what's going on out there. And then again, this risk management process, that assess, plan, and reflect. That should be something that you should practice, and engage with, and encourage your partners to do so as well. All right, and lastly, again, I'm not going to dive super deep into this and tell you how to use all this stuff, but this is mostly just an awareness about the gear you will need in order to learn rescue. And if you are going to travel in avalanche terrain, you do need to carry these 3 key pieces of gear with you. So that is a transceiver. You might hear this be called a beacon as well. The industry in general is moving towards calling it a transceiver these days because it can be confused with a personal locator beacon, which are becoming more common, or a PLB, which is something that you can like hit an SOS with, like in Garmin InReach or something. So the industry is moving towards calling it a transceiver. And this is what you use to help you find the general location of someone that is buried, because they would also be wearing a transceiver. You need a probe, and the purpose of a probe, it's this long stick tent pole like thing. But the purpose of the probe is you can put it together and you can poke the snow to pinpoint the location of a buried person in avalanche debris. And finally, you need a shovel. And this is to dig the person out once you pinpoint their location, so you can dig them out of the snow. And this is a special shovel. You can't just take, or you don't want to take just any old shovel. It's a light and strong and collapsible shovel that you can stick in your backpack. Um, all right. And then you're gonna want to take a avalanche rescue course to learn how to use this gear as well as continue to practice it every year, even if you have already taken an avalanche rescue class. All right, that was a lot of information. Thank you all for bearing with me, and congratulations if you're still here. I am going to move into a Q&A.
Oh my gosh, Jenny, that was amazing. It was like a fire hose of information, and we were here for it. It was awesome.
Amazing, great.
We have one question in the chat so far, but it's more of a, can you repeat that? What was
Oh,
your phrase from your mentor? Did we get away with it? What was that? It was so
so
iconic.
did we get after it or did we get away with it?
Yes, yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Iconic phrase. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them
Yeah,
in the chat.
we're ready. Huh? Ah, you were just so good. You answered all the questions before we even knew to ask them.
Yeah. Well, before, if anyone is still here before y'all depart, the Northwest Avalanche Center, especially if you're in the Northwest, there's lots of resources from them lots of opportunities, lots of events. We are very lucky that we have a very robust Avalanche Center here in the Northwest, providing so many opportunities. So I encourage you to get involved. And
Wonderful.
also sign up for an Avi level 1 if you want with Alpine Ascents.
Yes, I gave everyone false information. The discount code that I popped in the chat is actually for $50 off, not 25. So please use it. We don't have a code for an avalanche rescue course, but let's say the same code will get you $25 off. Yeah. And I'll put that in the post-trip email to everyone. Cool. Sydney, one final question from me to you. What are you most excited to do this winter in the backcountry?
Well, I mean, I'm just really excited to get on snow in whatever capacity. I do have a tendency, my touring partners can attest that every time I'm out skiing, I say it's the best day ever. Because if I'm on skis, I'm happy. And I have not been out skiing yet this year, and so it still feels a little bit foreign. Before every first time, I'm like, skiing? Do I really do that? Wow, that's so cool. I'm so excited to do that. So that's my vague but all-encompassing answer.
Nice, wonderful. Well, we're all doing snow dances. Hopefully the snows will come. And thank you all for attending, for taking this step and getting more educated before you head out in the backcountry. It's like so important. If you have any questions that come to you later, do feel free to email us at Alpine Ascents, climb@alpineascents.com, and we will answer them straight away. We hope to see you on an avalanche course this winter.
Yay, thanks, Mary.
Oh, thanks, Sydney. It was awesome. Have a great evening and have dinner or whatever.
Yeah, you too, and everyone else. All right.
Okay. Bye. Bye, everyone.